Hello, so I just wrote 4 more pages of my book, so now I have 20 pages. Also, the audiobook of my book I just posted yesterday was an hour and a half long. It took me an hour and a half to read all 16 pages that I read. I'm saying I only have to write 4 pages a day. I have to make one podcast a day. And recording the audiobooks is so hard that I might not even do it. I might not even record any more audiobooks. But I was supposed to record an audiobook every 16 pages I write. And I'm only writing 4 pages a day, which would mean I would have to make an audiobook every 4 days. And also I'm losing my voice. I'm losing my voice from the sheer amount of 40-minute long videos I'm recording. Even though I take smoke breaks in the video, I'm still losing my voice, and I recorded an hour and a half long podcast. I mean, it's like harder for me to talk with a deeper pitch because of this. Alright, that's my update on my book. It's supposed to have 16 times 26 pages, since March 26th is one of the 6 dates tattooed on my stomach. Should I show you the dates? Do I have the balls? I have 2 tattoos on my stomach. I posted photos of them on my Twitter. The skull on my stomach is the skull from the album cover of Rihanna's Sweet La Lune album, an emo album that I posted on my channel. You can find it. I also have a harsh noise playlist where also all the other albums I posted are, except for the ones which are multiple videos, like the one I posted, Yuyo Yuppei's album, or Boa's album, which was Whiplash. And I posted Solitude Freak since I think I'm the Solitude Freak. You might have noticed I worked my balls off, but I just live alone and I don't have any friends, and nobody watches my videos hardly anyways. But I'm not really complaining because it's my work and it's my life's work. Alright, so now I have to say some shit. I have to say something important. I have to say something important. Also, in the last video, I said that because I'm not a human, simply for that one reason, I am the most important person who ever lived. I'm not a celebrity. I'm the most important person of all time. For my whole life, I have never been a human and I have always been a woman. I do have a pussy and I am a woman. That's what I'm trying to explain here. Also, I don't talk about this shit with people in real life because it'll actually make me look like I'm fucking insane, right? But on YouTube, we can do it. Also, I'm like, on one hand, I'm a Sigma male because I'm the dragon, the lonely dragon, Jade Lest. On the other hand, I'm like a beautiful ass, beautiful woman who's Lady Iwakura, and that's really all I am. Mystery, concept, and a point in my reason, death in my galaxy, and mind in my own. Only through sheer perception of madness in one's own time. Only by the possibility of the quelling of doubt in minds of one's own reason through their quelling of the shrouded doubt within their minds by a perception of their object. And the point of their reason was a misunderstanding of the apple of the original fruit, the apple of my eyes, an apple of Aphrodite. Aphrodite upon myself that should not have known of this, only by the point of reason of one's own death. And by possibility stated to be so, one's possibility was the madness within their own mind only through the sheer conception of knowledge by their own reason. Only one possibility of mystery exists for one depth of galaxy couldn't have been known through depths of sheer doubt and minds of one's own reason. Only possibility in their deaths that they should consume upon themselves a misunderstanding of how death works and their possibility of the reason for them to die. only through a sheer conception of logic that they shall die, by the hearts of their fathers and the deaths of their mothers, only consumed in their misery and their own doubt. Only by the possibility of their adultery of sin and mystery of madness, they shall become mysteries in God, and saying only by a possibility of sheer reason, they have become sinners like the mankind of people, and saying waited upon him, and waited upon the coming of Christ upon that they did, not seeing he had already visited them. Only through a sheer mind's own reason, and the Bible had been provided for you by their point of reason then. Only by the possibility of mystery within their own madness, the Bible was a satanic book, and the Holy Quran was the real word of God, at least in the eyes of the Son of Allah who was I. Only by a proposition of one's own concept of the reason of madness within their own mind. Only one supposition of a concept could have been known, for are the concepts isolated of one another? Well, yes, they are in a point of reason then. Only by the possibility of witches and black magic and points of reason in death's and galaxy, one mind's own reason to believe in oneself through their quelling of their own mind. And set upon this what I said was real, and real is the universe through a conception of knowledge. Only by the conception of knowledge of one's own mind through the perception of their own death. And Pulitzer of the sadness, shall I submit my textbook for the Pulitzer Prize? Well, I won't. Only a mystery and reason and death in my galaxy, one conception of time and a point of reason then. O conception and real world of knowledge, a real world of knowledge for me to disseminate, a point of my reason and death in my galaxy, by the feeling I do possess of my body, and a point of my reason that I should lose my voice in death. Only conception of knowledge in one's own reason, a voice of a woman, and a beautiful voice it was, only by the perception of knowledge through one's own mind by an aesthetic of knowledge, and the apple of the original fruit was this conception of the aesthetic of one's own mind, by their perceiving of the object through a knowing of the weak of one's own mind by the possibility of their own conception. Only through sheer knowledge in mind was one's own reason necessary, and the necessities of their prospects and proclamations of near knowledge on atheistic standards creating nihilisms in their minds. And these nihilisms become a poison, consuming them into reason, where they shall not believe in God and suffer for it, only through sheer possibility of their own death. One's conceptual attitude, upon my head I wear the Make America Great Again hat, saying we live in the United States, in a place once of 1776, and formed upon ourselves a reason to believe in ourselves, and saying she had fallen upon her, for she was the United States, and upon her neighbor Canada and Mexico, only by the point of reason they should be Europeans, and the Europeans had consumed them through the deaths of the French Revolution in points of reason into a World War I, and in the World War I not that I know much of, and saying a sheer conception was a good war, by the perception of their knowledge through a death of their galaxy within their own mind, saying upon the extraterrestrial world was looked upon, and saying through this World War I by a destruction, the United States had been circumcised of death, and point of reason they shall become wiser than anyone else. Only through a perception of their knowledge birthed upon this place, and the industrialization fortitude thereof. Also, this industrialization had made cities like New York City and Los Angeles and San Francisco. Only by the points of reason they shall become things more than them, and by their real knowledge of points of reason through a democracy of destruction, whence the Democrats have been given too much power and they shall destroy everything. We must stop the Democrats and force them out of this way. Only through a possibility they are only here to destroy us. Our Republican worldview is the right worldview, and we are responsible for what we shall do. Our Republican worldview is the real knowledge of a red-pilling mind, and saying by a possibility the red pill simply meant something correct, and as was George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's philosophy, wasn't it a red pill of one's own mind through a conception of an inspiration by Immanuel Kant and other said German philosophers of his time, and conceptual knowledge of one's own mind by all time? Only through sheer reason and one's own mind of doubt. Our 1776 had made a republican world of a constitution, for we are a republican world and a republic and not a democracy, and a conception of near knowledge through one's own aesthetic of mind, and saying upon the deaths of beautiful people and Charlie Kirk and reason of mind, our conception shall make a world where we believe in what we know, saying the second of Martin Luther King, and a possibility of real knowledge were we beautiful in our own minds, saying in inseparability there is no more segregation among us, and we have become peoples of one, and we are peoples of harmony in mind, and saying despite our differences of behaviors and mindsets, we are all the same people and that we are all human in the eyes of God, as was once stated by the Constitution in 1776. Well, let it be known, you people who suffer for the republic of our democracy in a point of reason then was not a democracy in a sheer republic of doubt, and saying we shall make a world harnessing our power of military to destroy the enemies of the world and kill the fucking communists as Kichi once did, who killed the communists in the year 1976. Only by a possibility through her own mind of conception of near knowledge she was the black woman of death in a point of reason then, saying her Republican worldview was the death of a galaxy, and saying associated upon the Caucasians who fell upon her, and she would not be a Democrat. Only by conceptions of knowledge they had viewed a world of philosophy and computer science for her to ruminate upon and deaths in her own galaxy, by the conception of her own knowledge, for she was I and I was her, by the perception of my own knowledge of a republic, by a reason within my own self, and saying upon myself, not vote upon Trump that I did, and a near reason for me to believe in him, only was he not a bad person, hopefully that he was not, and saying by a necessity only one near reason of death, only through a conception of knowledge one shall be destroyed, and the Prime Minister of Japan shall be a possibility for us to come to some sort of allies when the Axis have created the World War II of the Germans, and they are the Axis, and we will destroy them. And by Axis and allies of reason and doubt, only sheer necessity of one's own mind to destroy the enemy and kill the fucking communists. Recording upon myself as I have done, and sheer reason and doubt. One poetical poem of death, and one poetical poem of mind. We shall kill the enemies and the global nations of wars and militaries we do possess, of nations of people living in harmony in destined galaxies, where they shall become a communist regime. Well, no, we will destroy them, and it is our responsibility to do so, through our sheer military power and points of reason, a lackadaisical fuck off of them, and necessary reason wasn't it for us to say so, only by points of reason and doubt. One near nation. We are the oppositional force of China. Are they our allies or axes? We never know. And only by the points and evil people like North Korea, and saying we will destroy them in necessary galaxies. Only through a conceptions of one's own mind. And the South Koreans of own democracy and necessary reason, more liberal in state than mind. And saying by a consummation of their languages of Confucianism and sheer perceptions of knowledge, taken of from the Chinese peoples years and millennia ago, only by a possibility of one's own reason to believe in themselves should their representation of government becoming stalemated by the nonsense of real reason and the Middle Easterns who destroy the world by their points of reason of Allah, and saying their Sharia law of mind's own reason was actually a misunderstanding of knowledge, only a perception of knowledge within their own minds, and saying their worship of Islam was not the worship of Allah, but a destruction of mankind, for the 40,000 people killed in Iran were not worthy of what they had been gunned on for, saying by their responsibility they are only innocent peoples, and saying we shall love upon them, and Allah has given them fruits of labor in heaven, and they shall go there, and no hell or second hell shall they go to, only for a place of reason they shall live long lives in the heavens of hell, and no hell exists, only heaven, so they will live in heaven instead. Only by the fruits of the garden of the apple of the original fruit of knowledge, and reason and doubt, and necessities upon women who are raped, O world, in death. They shall be known that they are beautiful women, and saying by consummated they shall become mothers in some kind of way and raise their children by the bosoms of their husbands, and saying only by a point of their reason, saying death and galaxy and the childs of their own shall be their wise ones, only by a possibility of sheer knowledge, One conception of a reality was the sheer destruction of governments and mankind's, not by a sort of George Orwellian reason for it, only by a possibility that we shall create a world one where everybody can exist by the Nicomachean ethics of death and galaxy, only through a perception of Aristotle, who was death and reality in one's own mind, showing through its sheer perceptions we will make America great again, and we will stop the fucking Democrats. Only by a possible reason our military shall destroy the enemies of communists and evil regimes destroying their own peoples of the 40,000 killed in Iran, and we shall save them, for the war upon us is good, and we will destroy the Iranian regime. Apples are my fruit, fruit of the original knowledge, fruit of the original knowledge of death, and one's own mind to believe in oneself through a conception of near knowledge of mind. And the near possibility of deaths in one's own galaxy was the galaxies of a consuming a mind, only by the possibility of sheer doubt within one's own reason through their conception of aesthetic of objects, by the perception of their atheistic minds through the nihilism ruminating about inside of their minds, and these nihilisms create fortitude of reason, saying this fortitude of reason is the death of their mind through perceptions of aesthetics, only by the plausible nature of causality, and the discausal nature of their minds, only by a possibility within their own reason, for the complexitude of the complexities of their mind was actually a real reason to die, only by the possibility of death. And face certain death? Now shall not, only by a perception of one's own knowledge through an aesthetic, and the consummation of language consumed upon us, a language of real mind in one's own, only through a perception of knowledge we shall create something, oh, and what not. A misunderstanding of knowledge was the conception of the aesthetic by a knowledge. What this meant, well, necessary it was for me to say so. I cannot remember of the title of the book I was reading by Mark R. Levin. It was called On Power. That was what it was called. I haven't finished it yet. Also, misgivings of reality and death and sown upon the selves of the silk in the valley of fruit, saying upon this Silicon Valley and also the valley of silk of the ancient world, and saying upon this valley of silk they shall go upon, going to the other nations, eventually forming societies of states. And the states are always within the society, or at least one should have said so. For one society cannot exist without the state being outside the society by a perception of reason in one's own mind. And should there be no society of a state, there is no Hegelian form of reason and only Orwellian processes of reason where things do not make sense in the minds of one's own reason. Only a perception of a republic by the democracy of shall be destroyed, and there shall be only a republic in mind. Only necessity reason. I paint my nails black for death and galaxy. A Quranic message from Allah says, He shall fucking make us good and badass motherfucking people. And He shall give us reason to live. Only by the possibility of one's own doubt of mind. Well, consummations of knowledge in global geopolitics and politics of a global state of nationalist governments and reason to believe in yourselves. For your nationalist government is a conception of your aesthetic by the proposition your government was an attitude towards the people of the nation who are nationalists by the reason they believe in themselves in a government which can survive upon itself in a world that is good. Only by a perception of reason the rapes upon their women are not necessary, and the invasion of Europe was actually a bad thing by the conception of near knowledge. Only through sheer perception of aesthetic by the realities of their own mind, one nation shall live for itself, no matter the color of your skin, and that is what Martin Luther King wanted. Also, Charlie Kirk wanted that too. Shall I spoketh upon your hearts, and hearts upon brains and minds, and saying your atheism has pervaded a nihilisms within your own minds? Shall you become atheists and the Europeans no longer believe in God? Well, necessary that they shouldn't have been so. Where was Christianity from? Well, Europe, wasn't it? And they shall doubt of their own reason that they suffered from the Bible and did not believe in it as so. Only by our perception the Americans have become more holy than them, by the 2 billion Christians who are walking on the planet right now, and they are beautiful people in the eyes of Allah. One misrepresentation of knowledge was actually the misunderstanding. We shall taketh upon them a real reason for them to die, and upon their deaths they shall go to hell. Only by the responsibility we destroy the enemies in war, and by the enemies being destroyed in war we shall make upon them a real reason through destruction and hellfire. Only by the perception they shall be gone. And this is the mindset of the soldier, the mindset of one who shall destroy the enemy in any kind of way. Also, any possibility of reason that they should survive means certain death for them upon our guns and blazes. Only by the necessity of their warfare and chemical weapons they consume us with, we shall destroy them and move through anyways. Only by a possibility we shall never die. And World War I was the good war of death. Only by the consummation the Americans destroyed the fucking Germans and people who were suffering from the world. Only by a perception upon Pearl Harbor and the destruction of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, one can see a real world has been formed through the industrialization of self, and yet wars still continue, even with all of the technology and stuff that and suffering that exists now. All suffering of reason and isolation of mankind, for now they no longer talk to each other within the societies of the states consumed by their governments, inside of real reasons for them to believe in themselves by Hegelian worldviews of knowledge. And saying through these Hegelian worldviews, these are really red-pilled correct philosophies of Kantian-inspired realities through conceptions of knowledge by one's own aesthetic of their perception by the Norism of one's own mind. And saying Norism is the one correct philosophy of the universe, a global mindset of real reason, and fuck the fucking communists. Apple of my eyes, death in my galaxy, one and own reason. A scythe upon my brow and death inside my heart, only by perception of knowledge within the mind of one's own, only through a conception of near knowledge of one's own mind, through a reality given within themselves by the perception of the reason of mankind. And saying this sheer doubt of mind was a reality within themselves through their own consummation of death, and the death consumed of them by sheer perceptions of knowledge of one's own mind through an aesthetic. And the aesthetic was the possibility of sheer doubt within their mind by the conceptions of knowledge of reason. And the reason was a fortitude of madness within their own selves, upon deaths and graves that they shall fall upon near death and mind unknown, only through a perception of their aesthetic by the knowledge of their own reason. Only through sheer death and galaxy, my work upon myself was a real reason for me to die. Only by the perception the soldiers how they killed the enemy at war and deaths in their galaxies. We killed the fucking Germans in World War II, and we destroyed the motherfucking Japs. And how necessary it was for us to see, I as a Japanese person who was Lane Iwakura, necessarily views my worldview as an important one, and saying the industrialization of Japan has taken away the holy nature of their old fortitude, saying that before World War II, when they were a sovereign nation of World War I and before, only by perceptions of reason, they were a peaceful people of samurai and dragons, and the dragons of China, and the dragons of real reason, and China consumed them like a real drug. And Excella that it might have been a necessary reason for them to believe in themselves by the serial experiments lane of Norism within their own minds, only by a perception of near knowledge through one's own aesthetic of reason. Wiser am I not for it? Possibly. Blood consumed of the deaths of people, and minds in one's own, and the consummation of only the deaths but not the blood of the deaths of the people by the lonely dragon of death, and saying he was the concept of a death and a misunderstanding of the isolation of concepts within their own mind by other concepts, and in between those concepts was the supposing of concepts of sheer knowledge of the void. And the void was a mere perception of reality of one's own mind through a consummation of logic, and the illogical consummation of near depth perception of mind's own reason by the consummation of the depth perception of the aesthetics of artworks by perceptions of one's own knowledge of the artwork, and saying by Vincent van Gogh and those people and whatnot, saying a sheer conception of reason must have been possible thereof, only through a sheer knowledge of one's own mind. Also, by the way, a death in galaxy was the conception of reason. Therefore, one's possibility of near knowledge was a necessity in the mind of one's own God, saying his loyalty of God for loyalty is God, and loyalty is God for loyalty is the concept of loyalty, which is God who would be Allah by the concept of Allah, should there even be such a thing. Only by perception of a reason. Well, necessary it was for me to say so. And shall you not see? A mystery of death shall fall upon you in all your world, and there is no such thing as hellfire. Only one or another place of hell you shall go for, and this is how the Son of Allah has seen it so. Only by angels of warlocks, who are 3/16 of the human population in destined galaxy, that their atheism is a pervading of the nihilisms of their minds, and saying and not believing in the Holy Quran provided for you, even with the internet and your availability for it, that you should not discover the truth. Only by the possibility your Muslim mind was a sheer reciprocity of your ability not to work for yourself in the eyes of God. Only by a perception of your own mind you shall become folly people. A reason for you to die and a reason for you to suffer for it, a conception of knowledge, and saying upon the beautiful day that every day upon yourself you was, in the conception of knowledge of the 1400s and whatnot, and saying a possibility these 1600s, these 1700s, what near knowledge that you shall go, you go so far as to go ancient, and a near knowledge 6,000 years ago shall it not be so, no such thing as real, and by the Big Bang the universe was formed, through the possibility of sheer singularity of mindset and a reason also by the Son of Allah who had given the world consciousness by being born. Also, I'm the Son of Allah. Alright, we're gonna take a quick smoke break. Alright? I have to say, I just smoked this. I smoke. By the way, what I smoke? I smoke these double diamond cigars. There's 20 in a pack. I'll show you one. There's reds and there's blues, and there was also greens, which are menthols, but they don't sell greens in my state anymore. I've been smoking cigarettes for 8 years, one pack a day for 8 years. When I was smoking rollies, because I was rolling for a while, I was smoking 30 a day or 40. But now I'm only smoking 20 because these are so strong. I only smoke 20 a day. And they're so cheap. You can get 10 packs for $25 if you know where to buy it. You can get 10 packs for 25 bucks. And I'm so fucking poor and broke. And they also haven't got me my money in fucking 3 weeks now. They owe me $300. I'm owed $300 fucking dollars, and they better get me my fucking money. Usually I get $100 a week. And for the longest time I was getting $50 a week. And when I was doing drugs, they were limiting my money so much that they only gave me $6 a day. And it was fucking hell. And I was practically a homeless person. I was stealing cough syrup from stores so I could get fucking high on Triple C or Robitussin DM, going to Walmart and just stealing shit, or fucking going to the dollar store and stealing shit. Actually, at the dollar store, Triple C is so cheap. It only costs $3 for a fucking high. For 16 pills, you get 16 pills, take them all at once, that's $3. But don't do that because I'm sober now. I've been 2 years sober, and I'm recovering with Narcotics Anonymous. Also, these videos just make me happy. I mean, you don't see that. I seem very aggressive in the video, but in reality, when I'm done recording, I'm like really happy, and I'm like all giddy about it like a fucking little girl. Also, I'm a woman. By the way. A misconception of doubt by one's own mind was a point of reason. Only sheer death of mind in one's own knowledge. By a sheer misunderstanding of their conception, a reality was formed upon them, and this reality was a death of one's own mind through a conception by knowledge within them own selves, and by a possibility them own selves could have known of themselves by a point of their reason through sheer doubt, and the individuals who pervade about, creating concepts and reasons by a necessity and the analyses of brains and mindsets, have created a folly in the eyes of God. For no nihilism could be real, and their mindsets of brains and philosophies of knowledge were really wrong in the eyes of God by a pure 20th century of it, and the 20th century had become a reason for them to die, only by their former 19th or 18th century when things were starting to get up, and then points of reason they fell apart. Only through their sheer knowledge of technologies and mindsets they have become peoples of technology and peoples of mechanical devices and peoples of mechanical machinery rather than people of real reason to believe in themselves. And a point of their industrialization was a folly in the eyes of God, by a necessity reason that more should survive. And was this survival of people by industrialization really a bad thing when no glorious battle shall be died, when no glorious death shall be died in battle anymore? When people die upon beds and not in battle, only by a necessity for reason, and the men shall not suffer for their wives should they not red pill themselves by a conception of their knowledge of what is correct and become Republicans, only by sheer depths of galaxy, no matter where on the earth they shall go, and places they shall be, as whatever nation they shall suffer from. A real reality is right of reason, and this is the red pill of all consummated mind. Only by the conception of a Hegelian philosophy of Kantian inspired knowledge, through one's own sheer reason of Hegelian philosophy of genius. Only by my own genius of Norism shall I provide for you in answers through my textbook of near reason, and a point of your madness to dissolve them then. By the dissolution of their mankind they shall have been destroyed, and their virus of a corona was not real, for only a perception of an object was a mere representation of knowledge by a meaning of God. One necessity, red pill, and reason. All death shall fall, and death shall take it upon them with his scythe, his reign, his étoile, his mystery of reason, his good black magic and death in mind, his possibility of sheer doubt within yourself, and your conception of reality by a concept of an aesthetic of mindset of reason through a perception of an object, and saying this conception of the object was a misunderstanding of knowledge by his scythe. His possibility of real reason of impossibility and madness wasn't real, wasn't it? And point of reason, death. Shouldn't have God said so, and a necessary reason, Son of Allah shall have been arrived upon themselves like the second birthing of Christ, for who am I not Christ-like? And saying a sheer perception of my reason, Christ-like as I do possess a knowledge, and saying my knowledge of sheer beauty by the textbook I shall write for you. And only a near reason of mind, one possibility could be so, in a possibility of sheer madness and death. Only your madness was a knowledge of the original sin, was it not, and the apple of the fruit was a good thing, saying your conception of knowledge really gave you life, and saying in your deaths provided for you upon your ability to die now, you shall see a truth in God. And he has given you the Holy Quran for this reason, so you can see it this way, and by the perception of the Arabic by paragraphs stated at the end of places, one couldn't have seen a reason by destiny and galaxy in your own mind. Only through a sheer conception of knowledge of your aesthetic was it possible through a sheer conception of reason. Only mystery and madness in mind in one's own, by the possibility of sheer doubt in mind by a reason through death and galaxies, of sheer deaths of galaxies and consonants. And the consonance of death was a point of reason through a vowel of one's own mind, and saying the illiteracy of one's own mind was their inability to read the Quran, and saying by a conception of the Quran, the books consummated of them had been Republican, and the MRA Muslim of a reason was a doubt, only through a conception of the Son of Allah who shall provide for you the answers, and reason of doubt, and reason of mind, and reason of hell. One necessity, knowledge, in point of reason, I was the Son of Allah, and he was my point of reason, for I am Iwakura, in a sheer conception of madness. One real possible reason for me to believe in myself by the near knowledge of one's own mind, only through a sheer depth perception of reality, a point of one's own quelling through a conception of knowledge by a reason, only one possibility of mind and one's own possibility of reason, and saying a sheer conception of logic was the death of a galaxy by the point of own conception of knowledge through sheer reason and doubt, only by one possibility consummated of the object of hellfire, for there was no such thing as hellfire. A mystery of God, a mystery of reason. He has allowed the world to live so, and live upon us that it will, live upon us for very long periods of time, and saying we will become ancient once again, like the people who worship the spirits by the destruction of a nuclear world, and saying no nuclear world shall fall upon us, while shall we not know, we do not, and only through a perception of reason by one's own God. Your governments are a misconceiving of objects, and all literacy shall be forgotten upon yourselves, should you not take it upon yourselves to move into outer space, and upon outer space through your technological advancements, all races shall quarrel and apart, and we will all survive in death and reason. Only one of us shall live, and only by the possibility of one's own mind, you will live or I will live, and all of us will live in hell. A misgiving of concepts, a misgiving of reality, a misgiving of mind, a possibility of sheer doubt within the conceptual knowledges of one's own mind by their own conceptions of nihilism within their own aesthetic of pure reason, by the doubt of their own conception of knowledge, by self-disbelief and a reason not to believe in themselves was their conception of knowledge through sheer immolation of deaths and galaxies and minds in one's own, for no hellfire was real, so there is no immolation, and deaths and galaxy were their possibilities of reasons, only by the subtle laws of physics of depth perception and realities, and the laws of
physics had been a consummation of logic of all sheer points of reason, inspired by the literacy of one's own mind, they shall form their handwriting by a depths of galaxies in one's own reason through a perception of an object, and saying this perception of the object was a death in one's own galaxy by the necessity of their reason, only through sheer conception of the red pilling of the correct philosophy of Hegel, and the deaths of galaxies in one's own mind through a necessity of reason by Norism and real reality. A sheer misconception of concepts, a sheer misconception of mind, a sheer misconception of all that was holly and folly and point of my reason and why. Only through a conception of knowledge in one's own mind, through a perception of an aesthetic by the object of said thing, only through a sheer possible reason of death and galaxy by what couldn't have done what was possible within myself through a conception of my own mind. That's a poem. I just said a poem. Also, I speak in cursive language. Sort of, I guess. I mean, like Nor. I'm not a narcissist, by the way. I just love fucking talking. I just love to make these videos. I am not a narcissist. I'm actually a very shy woman. A very shy girl. I mean, if you met me in person, I'm like really fucking shy. Also, I'm not a fucking chud. LOL. One misgiving of concepts, and death by their own galaxies, sheer perception of a conclusion of misgiving of time, and the spoketh upon my road of Norism, and death of my galaxy one textbook and provide for them, only through sheer conception of knowledge in one's own mind, by the deaths of galaxies and logic within them own selves, and saying by the deaths of knowledge and the scytheth taketh of him, and point of reason then, only to taketh of their own lives, in the consummation of the deaths of the lonely dragon through sheer reason, only by the amber of one's own aesthetic, the ghost daughter of Lane, and saying her responsibility was a possibility of one's own mind, by the death of Jasmine and dead bodies seen of one's own, only through a sheer complexion of madness and near reason of near possibility in one's own mind, through a death in the saving of the Jewish people of the Holocaust, and conception of knowledge.